Now, the World Health Organization has declared the fast-spreading monkeypox outbreak a global health emergency. It's the WHO's highest level of alert. It was issued by the UN Health Agency chief despite a deadlock among experts over the decision. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus thinks the risk of the virus is high in Europe and moderate globally. More than 70 nations are now experiencing an outbreak of the virus, which is common in parts of Central and West Africa.
We have an outbreak that has spread around the world rapidly through new modes of transmission, about which we understand too little and which meets the criteria in the international health regulations. For all of these reasons, I have decided that the global monkeypox outbreak represents a public health emergency of international concern.
Well, Lawrence GOSTIN is the director of the WHO Centre on Global Health Law. He's also the founding O'Neill Chair in Global Health Law at Georgetown University. And he joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much indeed for being on the programme. So just how worried should we be about monkeypox now?
Well, I mean, we should absolutely be worried. We've seen an exponential rise in monkeypox cases. It's now in 5 WHO regions of the world, in many, many dozens of countries, with cases rising exponentially. So it's of concern. Right now, outside of endemic areas in Central and East Africa, it's primarily, but not exclusively, but primarily within communities of men who have sex with men. But that should not lead to complacency. That community matters a lot, and it also could spill over easily to other communities.
In San Francisco, people waited in line to get vaccinated for monkeypox, a virus that is spreading so rapidly, the World Health Organization has now declared it a global health emergency.
We have an outbreak that has spread around the world rapidly through new modes of transmission, about which we understand too little and which meets the criteria in the international health regulations. For all of these reasons, I have decided that the global monkeypox outbreak represents a public health emergency of international concern.
There have been about 3,000 cases in the U.S. so far, and many more in Europe and dozens of other countries, including India, Russia, and Brazil. Matt Ford battled the virus for more than 3 weeks.
It was excruciating at times. I had intense flu-like symptoms, so fever, chills, sore throat, cough, sweating through my sheets at night. And then, the telltale skin lesions, which I had from the get-go, but more of them appeared throughout the infection. And towards the end, I counted more than 25 all over my body, and they just appeared everywhere. At worst on more sensitive skin and more sensitive areas.
Women and children in the U.S. have caught monkeypox, but the U.S. Centers for Disease Control says 99% of the cases are seen among gay and bisexual men. The disease is spread by close, skin-to-skin body contact. Monkeypox vaccine and testing kits are in short supply, frustrating health experts.
I think we kind of stumbled out of the blocks in a few ways, one of which is testing. I don't think there was enough testing available early enough. And then the second thing is with the vaccines. We have vaccines available, they're approved, we have them purchased. They are in a national stockpile, and it's been getting them out of the stockpile has been really challenging, and that's currently where the bottleneck is right now.
The White House says the government has distributed 300,000 doses of monkeypox vaccine and is trying to speed up the shipment of about 800,000 more doses from Denmark, where they are manufactured. But that may be too little, too late.
I think I'm very worried that the window for containing this outbreak is closing quite quickly. And so without the vaccines, I'm just very nervous that we're not going to be able to contain this as quickly as we'd like.
Matt Ford said he's disappointed that the public health response to the outbreak seems sluggish.
Yeah, I think the government response has been very flawed and very delayed.
2.5 years of dealing with the COVID pandemic, public health systems in the U.S. and elsewhere are stretched to their limits and ill-prepared to handle new outbreaks of disease. Rob Reynolds.
Their paddy fields look lush and green, but in reality these farmers are struggling. On May 6 last year, they were forced to go organic overnight, and their production has plummeted since.
I am very sad that poor people are facing huge problems now.
Kumara Megastana lost his job as a construction worker after prices of cement skyrocketed. All he and his family have is a few paddy fields to feed themselves. By buying expensive fertilizer on the black market, he hopes to increase production.
I'm working so hard, but it feels as if it is all for nothing. The government gave us organic fertilizer, but it's not good. With good fertilizer, we got a lot of rice, but now it's just a fraction. Before I bought good fertilizer, my harvest went down with 50%.
6 months after their dramatic decision, the government lifted the ban. By then, the country was already in its worst economic crisis since its independence 70 years ago. This is one of the painful legacies of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's policies. The agricultural sector has nearly collapsed. In just 3 years, Sri Lanka, that long been an exporter of rice, has now been forced to import their staple food. The imports are costing the country dearly. Here in the hills around Kandy, Sri Lanka's second largest city, all of the country's current crises come together. To take their rice and vegetables to the market, farmers need fuel, which is in short supply. Those who are lucky enough to find fuel to buy find the markets nearly empty, because traders and buyers face a lack of fuel too.
We can't rely on this business anymore. If we manage to bring 500 kilos of vegetables from our farms here, there are no customers to buy it. And while the price has gone up, for example, 500 rupee a kilo, at the end of the day, I am forced to sell for 200 rupees. I keep losing money.
And the impending disaster.
Professor Marambe was sacked as a government advisor after he had warned the import ban was a recipe for disaster.
It's a man-made disaster, very unfortunately. It's too late, but still we have some hope that we are in the correct path. This is not going to say organic agriculture is bad. I mean, nobody should get that impression, right? They are all parallel lines, but we are looking at country's food security, not a food security of a small group of people.
He says domestically grown rice will run out in a few months, leaving whoever takes over as president a massive problem. How to pay for imported rice to prevent a humanitarian disaster when the government has run out of foreign currency. Step Vassen, Al Jazeera, Kandy, Sri Lanka.
An uneasy face-off in Sri Lanka on Friday evening, very different to the chaos of the morning. Hundreds of military personnel and police commandos surrounded anti-government protesters who had camped outside the president's office for 105 days. Mobile phone footage was live-streamed by those who were barricaded in and attacked.
Thousands of soldiers came and brutally beaten peaceful protesters and destroyed some IT camps and those things and take over the place behind us. And some of the protesters in the hospital, they are badly injured, and some of arrested, and also lawyers are also arrested. And I think President is covered, and he took cowardly action against the peaceful protesters.
Condemnation of the government's actions was harsh and swift.
Ranil, you are not too big for us. After taking the oath as president, you started with oppression. You started by warning the people. And we will respond to your oppression, your threats, and your thugs peacefully and democratically.
Lawyers say the use of armed forces to suppress civilian demonstrations on the new president's first day in office is despicable. The Centre for Policy Alternatives has called on Wickremesinghe to issue a public apology, ensure an independent investigation, and revoke the state of emergency. The UN has added its voice to the criticism.
The use of force against peaceful protesters runs contrary to international law, and we urge authorities to immediately halt the use of such force. All Sri Lankans have the right to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and the right to participate in public affairs.
But the president was busy swearing in his new prime minister and cabinet. Wickremesinghe has reappointed the same people who served under the Rajapaksas, prompting claims that he is acting as a proxy for the family. Protesters say they don't want another Rajapaksa in power, but the actions of the new president suggests he comes from the same mold. They say they won't stop their campaign till Ranil Wickremesinghe resigns.
Humans can take a lot of things, cold weather, hot weather, but one thing they cannot tolerate is humiliation. They bounce back. Much of what is happening throughout the world is a revolt against the elite, revolt against the privilege. And it's not only in developing countries, you can see that also in developed countries, that people are really frustrated because the elite has become very insensitive. The lifestyle has become insensitive. The elite in Sri Lanka, they lost confidence in Sri Lanka. They left, the children left. They never had two legs in Sri Lanka. And that is what triggered this unrest. It was an unrest where you had a serious gap between the elite and the common people. Now, with the technology that you have in your hand, you can actually see the lifestyle of the elite. They can see elite almost in front, and they know that this elite is capable or is responsible in some of the misdeeds and the sufferings, and is mocking those who are not in that elite platform. The main lesson from Sri Lanka would be whether the elite can actually keep its two legs in its own country, and not to humiliate people by having a lifestyle where people would feel humiliated. That the elite is humiliating, the human is mocking at the poverty, is mocking at the poor. That is unacceptable. Then you will have a serious unrest. One way to do that is how you link up with the diaspora so that they can also keep on reproducing the economy back home. Because what is happening now, as it has happened in Sri Lanka, it was not only a brain drain, there was also asset drain. The asset was going outside. That needs to be stopped. The elite, those who have one leg, can actually help and develop a village, how you can make a hospital in some of the remote areas, because that interaction is possible largely because of the technology that we have now. In order to make elite more sensitive, it is the elite which has to do the work. Otherwise, the general masses would not have the patience, because I think they have seen the world and they would take things in their hand. These are some of the lessons I think they can take from Sri Lanka.
The Muzzarelli family has been growing fruits and vegetables in the state of New Jersey for 4 generations. It's always been an unpredictable business, but this year profit margins are exceptionally tight and workers hard to come by.
It used to be 3-4 years ago, there was people coming in and out of the yard all year long looking for jobs. This year, I don't think one car pulled in the yard to look for work.
From fuel to fertilizer, according to the government, production expenses in the farm sector are projected to increase more than 5% this year.
The cost of fertilizer has more than doubled this season. That's largely due to the war in Ukraine, which combined with the coronavirus pandemic has led to a host of supply chain issues, driving up costs for farmers.
Labor costs, the biggest expense for fruit and vegetable farmers, have also gone up. Many here in New Jersey are paying top dollar to import pickers under a special visa program, but they're competing against countries that pay much less and grow year-round. So far this year, the amount of imported fruits and vegetables in the U.S. has surged 13%, according to the Department of Agriculture, putting many East Coast farms at risk.
Because grocery stores these days want a year-round consistent supply, and we are a seasonal production area. We can't supply everything 12 months of the year. So people are going to have to think a little bit differently about how they deal in the wholesale market. It's going to be a challenge.
Some farmers are selling directly to local consumers, attempting to diversify their crops and their customer base. And in May, President Biden authorized funding to produce more fertilizer domestically, as well as incentives for U.S. farmers to plant more crops to help make up for shortfalls of Ukrainian wheat. but it may be too late for Tom Shepard, who's looking to downsize his operation and expenses. He currently employs more than 200 people.
Unless the American consumer requests the supermarkets to stock local, at least the U.S.-made stuff, we're going to have a tough time because our wages are so much higher.
Farmers think it's a small price to pay to preserve local jobs and farmland. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, Cedarville, New Jersey.
Claudio Roldan has owned this hardware store in Buenos Aires for 11 years. He says he's struggling to keep it open as inflation soars.
I have been working since I was 14 years old, and of course I want change, but I don't think it's going to happen. People ask me why I keep this shop open, but what am I going to do? I have to pay rent, electricity. I cannot afford to close down.
Argentina has one of the highest inflation rates in the world, with an average close to 6% a month. Even though the exchange rate is controlled by the government, and ongoing financial crisis means the price of the local currency at the unofficial exchange rate drops on an hourly basis.
This is the Argentine peso, and what people are seeing is that it's losing value every minute. About 2 weeks ago, you needed around 20,000 pesos to buy $100. Now, you need over 30,000 to buy the same amount of dollars. The problem is that this translates into more inflation and more instability.
The government provides assistance to millions of poor people, but in recent months, social movements that represent informal workers have been demanding a universal basic wage.
There is a presence of the state, but all of that has been taken away by inflation, and now we need to help the people. Until a few years ago, that money allowed you to be above the poverty line. Now half the population lives in poverty.
Since taking office, President Alberto Fernandez has closed a $40 billion agreement with the International Monetary Fund and promised to jumpstart the economy. But mounting economic problems and deep divisions with his powerful vice president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, have paralyzed his administration. Analysts say the government is facing a confidence crisis.
Yeah, I think it's a statement that leads to a lack of confidence. So no one expects things to change. Let me give you an example. As I told you before, in Argentina, energy prices are subsidized. That's a big distortion of the economy. Since the beginning of the Alberto Fernandez government, the economic ministry has been trying to sort of cut those subsidies that actually are pro-rich. But the Kirchner faction within the government has been blocking that for 2 years. That's an example of the level of paralysis that permeates every level of the government, and that obviously creates uncertainty among people.
Argentina is rich in natural resources and has the capacity to feed millions of people, not only within its borders, but also around the world. But it's stuck in a seemingly endless cycle of economic troubles that several administrations have been unable to resolve. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
Foot and mouth disease spreads across Indonesia. This has become a familiar exercise for farmers. This dairy cow is unable to walk or even stand. Farmers are taking her to an abattoir.
This disease is frightening. First it hits their mouths with blisters, then the hoofs. Some cannot even walk, they just fall to the ground.
The highly contagious viral disease causes fevers and painful blisters. Infected animals lose their appetite, resulting in dramatic weight loss. Some go lame and many die.
It's infectious and spread through the air. If one cow is infected in a barn, the others will also be infected soon after.
Authorities are carrying out a mass vaccination campaign, and vets are treating livestock with vitamins and antibiotics. All of these cows are infected with foot and mouth disease. They are dairy cattle, but their milk production has dropped by more than 70% since they became ill. These cows will likely be slaughtered in coming weeks because farmers here say they cannot afford to keep caring for them. Most of Indonesia's cattle farmers are smallholders with herds of fewer than 100 animals. These farmers in Malang, East Java, say the outbreak has pushed them into financial ruin.
In my 25 years as a farmer, this is the biggest challenge I've ever faced.
The government says it is trying to stop the disease from spreading both domestically and overseas.
For Indonesia, especially in the tourist area like Bali, we have the biosecurity restrictions where people in and out have to be screened using the disinfectant.
Neighbouring Australia is on high alert, with estimates its economy could lose more than $50 billion over 10 years if foot and mouth disease reaches its farms. Arrivals from Indonesia have to undergo additional screenings, in the hope that scenes like this won't be repeated on their shores. Jessica Washington, Al Jazeera, Bogor, West Java.
Italy's President Sergio Mattarella announcing a 70-day timeline for early elections, clearly a decision he did not want to take.
The early dissolving of Parliament is always a last resort, particularly if, as it is the case in this period, the Parliament has many important tasks to complete in the interests of our country. But the developments in the political situation have led to this decision.
His announcement came hours after Mario Draghi stepped down. On Thursday, the Prime Minister made his last statement in Parliament before tendering his resignation.
Even central bankers' hearts are touched sometimes. Thank you for this, and thanks for all the work we have done together during this time.
Draghi led a government for less than 18 months. Many leaders across Europe saw him as a steady hand to pull Italy and maybe even the whole continent out of the pandemic. He helped steer billions of dollars of recovery funds to Italy, the largest recipient in the Eurozone, and was a leading voice in Europe's support of Ukraine against Russia. But in the end, this central banker couldn't wrangle the diverse group of parties in his coalition, each with its own priorities.
He couldn't tame the populists because the populists of the Five-Star Movement splintered during a civil war. He couldn't tame the other populists, the Lega from the right wing, because they're splitting. So there's a great chaos right now underway.
While some are lamenting the government's collapse, one party is thrilled. The far right-wing Brothers of Italy, currently leading in the polls, looks likely to win more seats than any other. Skeptical of Brussels and EU policies, it's not clear it will be able to manage relationships with other EU leaders as well as Draghi. And some worry it could even put further EU recovery fund payouts at risk. Adam Rainey, Al Jazeera, Rome.
Protesters in Panama burned tires and blocked roads once again in the capital and across the country. In a meeting on Monday morning, a majority of protesters literally tore up the agreement reached with the government late on Sunday to end the blockades in exchange for further reducing the price of petrol.
We had told the government we had to consult with the rank and file. The agreement was signed under pressure. The people have decided, and I comply with their decision. We want to tell the education minister, who could not be here today, that there is no agreement unless the issues behind this crisis are resolved.
Protesters now want more than the government's plan to reduce the price of fuel, medicine and food. Unions and indigenous groups are now demanding a national negotiation to address political corruption and discuss larger political reforms.
We have said repeatedly that there has to be one negotiating table. We have said that its structural issues need to be addressed. No more come and go on a few cents reduction on gasoline prices. Some with the cost of food, since businessmen keep accumulating wealth.
The government so far has not responded. The blockades on the Pan American Highway that connects Panama with the rest of Central America and is the country's main route for basic goods entered a third week. Economists warn the demonstrations have cost the country millions of dollars in losses and are leading to shortages of fuel and food. On Monday, most stalls at Panama's main produce market closed early for lack of fruits and vegetables.
Everything is stuck. Few things arrive. A little tomato, onions, peppers, or carrots and potatoes. And usually we can only sell 30% or so of what arrives. The rest is already ruined for being blocked for days.
Panama faces increasing social unrest and getting further away from finding a solution to end it. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera.
Already this year, Sydney and much of New South Wales have been devastated by torrential rain and floods. The forecast is more of the same, with the latest State of the Environment report declaring that extreme weather events like this are becoming the new norm.
In the last 5 years, we've documented the impact of extreme events such as storms, wildfires, very large bleaching events caused by heat waves, cyclones, droughts and floods, and they have impacted almost every square inch of Australia.
The 2,000-page scientific document paints a grim picture of Australia's ecosystems, from marine environments to the desert. Land and ocean temperatures are on the rise, and Australia has lost more mammal species than any other continent.
We name our footy teams and sporting teams after Australian animals. We really love our wildlife in Australia. It's so unique to the world, but we are destroying their homes. And the thing we can do to protect them is to protect their home, protect their habitats.
The scientific authors say pollution, mining, invasive species and climate change are to blame. Their solution is a drastic reduction in carbon emissions, as well as stronger national environment laws and a federal regulator to enforce them.
The State of the Environment report is compiled every 5 years. The last 4 have painted a grim picture, but the past reports have predicted the future impacts of climate change. This latest scientific assessment is recording the extensive damage that's happening now.
Responding to the report, Australia's newly elected government announced plans to protect 30% of the country's land and oceans by 2030.
What the environment really needs is a changed system. That's the message from the Samuel Review. That's the message from the State of the Environment report. Without structural change, we'll be resigning ourselves to another decade of failure without the tools we need to arrest our decline.
Another decade, scientists say, is too late. Sarah Clarke, Al Jazeera, Brisbane, Australia.
This is what remains of Al-Jaili Abdullah's home in Sudan's southeastern Blue Nile state. He's searching for any personal belongings he can salvage. Most were burnt in fighting between members of his Hamaj tribe and the Hausa.
We were surprised on Friday morning by members of the Hausa tribe attacking us and burning property, so we had to flee. My brother was killed right here. We found his body hacked to pieces. Now we're homeless and the situation is really tough.
Tensions peaked when the Hausa tried to establish a tribal administration and laid claim to land. Other tribes resisted. Fighting broke out and left dozens dead. Blue Nile State has seen repeated violence in the past decades, with fighting between government and rebel forces resulting in mass displacements. While a peace deal was signed in 2020 to end the violence, the latest cycle of tribal clashes seems to show that the state is far from permanent stability. Thousands have fled their homes, and the Hausa communities in several states have protested against the violence. Some tribal elders in Blue Nile believe it's politically motivated.
There are armed groups that want to broaden their base in preparation for elections, and they thought that they can mobilize tribes. It's unfortunate the Hausa responded. We had repeatedly called on them not to be part of this, but they didn't listen.
State authorities say the perpetrators will be prosecuted.
Blue Nile has long been a state with a diverse group of tribes. We urge all citizens to not listen to rumors or speeches that incite hate and anger, and to preserve unity between the residents.
Al-Jaili wants those responsible for burning down his home and killing his brother held accountable. But he says he's not sure if justice will be enough to end the anger and the violence. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Rosaires in Blue Nile State.